I brought my son a simple wooden picture frame for his birthday. Nothing expensive, just something I made in my garage workshop. He laughed, actually laughed, right in front of his wife and kids, and said, "Dad, really? We're not poor anymore." But then I handed him the envelope that was tucked inside. His face went white, because inside that envelope was something worth more than his fancy house, his BMW, and everything he thought made him better than his old man. And it was all his, if he wanted it. If you've ever felt the sting of being dismissed by someone you love, someone you sacrificed everything for, then you'll understand this story. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about your own experiences. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in these quiet heartbreaks. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was finishing dinner. Not an unusual time for a call, but when I saw my son's number on the screen, my heart did that little skip it always does. Michael doesn't call often anymore. He's busy, I tell myself. Successful people are always busy. But it wasn't Michael's voice that greeted me. It was Sarah, my daughter-in-law. "Hi, Dad," she said, and there was something in her tone that made me pause with my fork halfway to my mouth. Too careful, too polite, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. "Sarah, honey, how are you? How are the kids?" "We're all good, really good." A pause. "Actually, I'm calling about Michael's birthday next weekend, his 35th. We're having a little party and we'd love for you to come." I should have been happy. I was happy at first. My son was turning 35 and they wanted me there. But something about the way Sarah said it, "We'd love for you to come," felt like an obligation being fulfilled rather than a genuine invitation. "Of course I'll be there," I said. "What time?" 7 o'clock, Saturday. Nothing fancy, just family and some of Michael's colleagues. Another pause. "Maybe you don't need to bring anything big. Just yourself is enough." That last part hit me wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on why at the time. Don't bring anything big. What did that mean? After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Michael used to do his homework at the table while I cooked dinner, where we'd plan weekend projects and talk about his dreams of being rich someday, and I felt something hollow settle in my chest. When was the last time Michael had called me himself? When was the last time he'd asked how I was doing, or if I needed anything, or just wanted to talk? I tried to remember, and the silence of that kitchen seemed to grow louder. The next morning I found myself in my garage workshop, running my hands over the tools that Michael and I used to use together. This is where we built his first birdhouse when he was 8 years old. I can still see him, small hands trying to grip the hammer properly, tongue poking out the corner of his mouth in concentration. "Dad, is it straight?" he'd ask, and I'd adjust the tiny nail he was attempting to drive in. "Perfect, son. You're a natural." He was so proud of that birdhouse. Painted it bright blue because his mother loved blue, and we hung it right outside the kitchen window so she could watch for birds while she did dishes. When the first Robin family moved in that spring, Michael ran through the house yelling, "Mom! Dad! They love it! They really love it!" That little boy would have been mortified to know that 35-year-old Michael lived in a house where every surface was marble or granite, where everything had a price tag that meant more than the hands that made it. But I was being unfair, wasn't I? Michael had worked hard for his success. After his mother died when he was 16, I'd struggled to keep us afloat. My mechanic's salary barely covered the mortgage and his college expenses. He'd seen me worry about money every single day, seen me sell his mother's jewelry to help pay for his business degree. Of course he'd grown up wanting financial security. Of course he'd worked to build a life where he'd never have to worry the way we did. So why did it hurt so much that he'd succeeded? I picked up a piece of oak from the corner of the workshop. Good wood, strong, the same type we'd used for that birdhouse all those years ago. Before I really knew what I was doing, I was measuring it, cutting it, planning something simple but beautiful. A picture frame. Not because I couldn't afford to buy him something expensive, though I couldn't, not really, but because there's something about creating with your hands, about taking raw wood and turning it into something meaningful that money can't buy. I worked on that frame for 3 days, sanded it until it was smooth as silk, cut the joints so they fit together perfectly, applied stain that brought out the natural grain of the wood. It wasn't fancy, wouldn't impress his colleagues or look expensive on his desk, but every stroke of sandpaper, every careful cut, was made with love. While I worked, I remembered teaching Michael to use these same tools. How patient he used to be, how eager to learn. He'd ask 100 questions about grain direction and joint strength and why some woods were harder than others. I'd thought we were building more than just projects in this garage. I'd thought we were building a bond that would last forever. Maybe we were. Maybe that bond was still there, just buried under years of expensive suits and important meetings and the gradual drift that happens when excess pulls someone into a different world. The frame was finished by Friday evening. I wrapped it in simple brown paper, the kind I'd always used for his school lunches, the kind his mother had taught me to crease just right so it wouldn't come undone. Nothing fancy, but neat and careful. As I set it aside, ready for the party, I remembered something else. Something I'd been meaning to do for months, maybe years. I walked to my bedroom and opened the old wooden chest where I keep important papers. At the bottom, in an envelope that had been sealed for 2 years, were documents I'd been saving for the right moment. The deed to 47 acres of land outside town. Land that had been in our family for 3 generations. Land that my father had left to me, and that I'd always planned to leave to Michael. 2 years ago, when my doctor thought my heart condition was more serious than it turned out to be, I'd had my lawyer transfer the deed into Michael's name. I wanted him to have his inheritance while I was alive to see him enjoy it. But then my health improved, life got busy, and I'd never found the right moment to surprise him with it. Maybe his 35th birthday was the right moment. I tucked the envelope inside the picture frame, behind where a photo would go. 2 gifts in one. Something made with love, and something that would secure his future even more than his banking job already had. As I drove to Michael's house that Saturday evening, the wrapped frame sitting carefully on the passenger seat, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't expected. When had visiting my own son become something that made me anxious? The house was beautiful, I had to admit. Everything I'd never been able to give him growing up. The driveway was full of expensive cars, and through the windows I could see people in clothing that probably cost more than I made in a month. I sat in my old pickup truck for a moment, looking at that house, holding my simple wrapped gift, and wondering if I belonged there at all. But this was my son's birthday. My son, who used to fall asleep in the same truck on the way home from weekend fishing trips. My son, who used to be proud to introduce me to his friends as my dad, the guy who can fix anything. I took a deep breath and walked to the front door. The party was everything I'd expected, and nothing I was prepared for. Michael answered the door himself, and for just a moment, one brief, beautiful moment, his face lit up the way it used to when I'd come home from work. "Dad, you made it." He hugged me, and I could smell expensive cologne instead of the old spice he used to steal from my bathroom. But his arms around me felt the same, and for that moment, everything was okay. "Wouldn't miss it, son. Happy birthday." The house was full of people I didn't recognize. Michael led me through rooms with furniture that looked like it belonged in magazines, past conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in places I'd never been. Everyone was polite when Michael introduced me. "This is my father." But I could see them taking in my old sport coat, my work-worn hands, the way I didn't quite fit into their world. Sarah was gracious, as always. She got me a beer and made sure I had something to eat, asked about my health and whether I was still working on cars in my spare time. But even she seemed distracted, playing hostess to all these important people. I found myself standing near the back of the room during most of the party, watching my son laugh and joke with friends who looked like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. He was confident, successful, clearly respected by his peers. I should have been proud. I was proud. So why did I feel so invisible? When it came time for gifts, everyone gathered in the living room. Michael sat in a chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent, surrounded by perfectly wrapped boxes with elaborate bows and gift bags from stores I'd seen in the mall but never shopped in. He opened them one by one, and I watched the parade of expensive watches, bottles of wine that cost hundreds of dollars, the latest electronic gadgets, gift certificates to restaurants where a single meal would blow my weekly grocery budget. Each gift was received with appropriate enthusiasm, genuine thanks, and comments about how thoughtful the giver was, how much he'd love using whatever it was. His friends beamed at his reactions, pleased to have chosen something worthy of his new lifestyle. Then Sarah brought him my gift. I saw his face change the moment he felt the weight of it, or rather, the lack of weight. Brown paper wrapping instead of expensive gift wrap. No fancy bow, no gift tag from an upscale store. Just my careful handwriting on a simple tag. For Michael, with love, Dad. He looked across the room at me, and I tried to smile encouragingly. This was it. This was the moment he'd understand that some gifts can't be measured in dollars. He unwrapped it slowly, and I watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion to something that made my stomach drop. It was just a wooden picture frame, simple, handmade, obviously not store-bought. In that room full of luxury and sophistication, it looked exactly like what it was, something a father had made in his garage workshop because he couldn't afford anything better. Michael held it up, turning it over in his hands, and I waited for recognition to dawn. Waited for him to remember all those afternoons we'd spent together in that garage, creating things with our hands, talking about everything and nothing. Instead, he laughed. Not a delighted laugh, not a nostalgic laugh, a laugh that cut through 20 years of memories and landed like a slap. Dad, really? We're not poor anymore. The room went quiet. Someone coughed. I heard Sarah make a small sound, like she'd been punched, but all I could focus on was my son's face and the way he was looking at my gift, like it was something embarrassing, something he needed to explain away to his friends. A few of his colleagues chuckled along, and I realized they thought this was some kind of joke. The old man bringing a homemade gift to a party full of successful people. How quaint, how out of touch. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It shattered into pieces so small I wondered if I'd ever be able to put them back together. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the young man I'd sacrificed for, the person I'd loved unconditionally through every stage of his life, and he was embarrassed by a gift I'd made with my own hands, with love, with memories of when we used to create things together. But then I remembered the envelope. There's something else, son. I walked across that silent room, past all those expensive, beautiful people, and handed him the manila envelope that had been tucked inside the frame. Michael took it with that same patronizing expression, probably expecting old photographs or some sentimental letter he'd have to pretend to appreciate. He opened it carelessly, still holding the wooden frame in his other hand like it might contaminate him. I watched his face as he pulled out the documents, watched confusion replace condescension, watched his eyes scan the legal paperwork, the official seals, the surveyor's maps. Watched his face go completely white. Dad, this says... His voice trailed off. His hands were actually shaking as he read the deed transfer, the property assessment, the development plans that had turned 47 acres of family farmland into a $2.3 million windfall. The room was dead silent now. No one was laughing. No one was looking at their phones or checking ear watches or making small talk about vacation plans. Michael looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I had his complete attention. I wanted you to have your inheritance while I was still alive to see you enjoy it, I said quietly. I transferred the deed into your name 2 years ago, but I wanted to surprise you with it tonight, for your 35th birthday. The same people who had laughed at my wooden frame were now staring at documents worth more money than most of them made in a decade. I could practically hear them recalculating their opinion of the old man in the worn sport coat, but their reactions didn't matter to me. What mattered was the look on my son's face, and the wooden frame that now sat forgotten on the coffee table next to $2.3 million worth of undeveloped land. What mattered was that my gift had only become valuable to him when he realized it came with a fortune attached. What mattered was that I had just learned something about my son that I wasn't sure I could live with. Time moved differently in that moment. I could hear the grandfather clock in Michael's hallway ticking, could hear someone's ice clinking in their glass, could hear the central air conditioning cycling on, but everything else was frozen. My son sat there holding documents that would change his life, and I stood watching the man I'd raised try to process what had just happened. Dad, this can't be right. His voice was barely a whisper. This says the land is worth $2.3 million, I finished for him. Give or take, depending on when you decide to sell. The highway development project got approved last month. Your grandfather's old farmland is about to become very valuable commercial property. I could see him reading and rereading the property assessment, the development timeline, the transfer documents that made it all legally his hands. Were steadier now, but his face had gone through a dozen different expressions in the space of 30 seconds. Around us, the party had essentially stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. People were pretending not to stare, but I could feel the weight of their attention. Michael's successful friends, the ones who had chuckled at my homemade gift, were now looking at me like they were trying to solve a puzzle they'd badly misjudged. You gave this to me? 2 years ago? The paperwork was finalized right after your mother's birthday would have been. I thought about waiting until I was gone, like most people do with inheritances, but I wanted to see your face when you found out. I wanted to be here for the moment when you realized you'd never have to worry about money again. That was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd been planning this surprise for months, waiting for the right moment to give my son the security I'd never been able to provide when he was growing up. I'd imagined his reaction 100 times. The shock, the gratitude, the moment when he realized his old man had been sitting on a fortune all this time. I'd never imagined it would come after he'd laughed at a gift I'd made with love. Sarah was the first to break the silence. "Michael, say something." But what was there to say? We both knew what had just happened. In the space of 5 minutes, I'd gone from being the embarrassing father with the inappropriate gift to being the man who'd just handed him generational wealth. The wooden frame sat on the coffee table between us, and I found myself staring at it. 3 days of careful work, sanding until my fingers were raw, choosing the stain color that would bring out the natural beauty of the wood, cutting joints that would last for decades. It had meant nothing to him, less than nothing. It had been something to laugh about with his friends. But the envelope that had been tucked inside it, that had his full attention now. "Don't understand," Michael said, finally looking up at me. "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep this secret?" How could I explain that it hadn't been meant as a secret? That I'd wanted it to be a surprise, a moment of joy we could share together? That I'd imagined him opening that envelope and understanding finally that his father might not be rich in the way his friends were rich, but that he'd been thinking about his son's future all along? How could I explain that the surprise had been ruined the moment he laughed at something I'd made with my own hands? "I wanted tonight to be special," I said instead. "Your 35th birthday, a milestone. I thought it was time." Around us, the party was trying to restart itself. People were having quiet conversations, refilling their drinks, giving us space to process what had just happened. But I could feel their curiosity, their revised opinions, their sudden interest in the man they'd dismissed an hour earlier. Michael was still reading through the paperwork, and I could see the banker in him taking over, calculating, assessing, planning. This was what he was good at: numbers, investments, financial strategy. The emotional weight of the moment was being replaced by practical considerations. "The development timeline shows construction starting next spring," he said, more to himself than to me. "Property values in the area are going to skyrocket. If I hold on to it for another year before selling—" He was doing math in his head, and I realized I was watching my gift transform from a gesture of love into a business opportunity. Maybe that was inevitable. Maybe that was just who Michael had become. But it hurt to watch. "Michael," Sarah's voice was quiet but firm, "your father just gave you the biggest gift of your life. Maybe you could put the calculator away for a minute." He looked up at her, then at me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, embarrassment, recognition of what had just transpired. "Dad, this is incredible. I can't believe you've been sitting on this. I can't believe you just—" "Gave it away?" I finished. "It's yours, son. It was always meant to be yours. Your grandfather wanted this land to stay in the family, to take care of his family. Now it can take care of yours." I gestured toward his 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, who had been playing in the other room and were completely oblivious to the fact that their college educations had just been secured with a single envelope. "Their college funds," Michael said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Their futures. Everything." "Everything," I agreed. But as I said it, I found myself looking at that wooden picture frame again. Such a simple thing. Such a small gesture in comparison to $2.3 million. But it represented something that all the money in the world couldn't buy back. It represented the hours I'd spent in my workshop, thinking about my son, creating something with my hands because I wanted him to have something made with love. It represented the father who still remembered teaching a little boy to use a hammer, who still treasured the memory of bright blue paint on small fingers. It represented a relationship I was beginning to realize I'd already lost. Michael was hugging me now, thanking me, his voice thick with emotion. His friends were coming over to congratulate us both, to marvel at the unexpected turn the evening had taken. But all I could think about was the sound of his laugh when he'd opened my gift, the way he'd held up that frame like it was something shameful, something that needed to be explained away. The money would change his life. The land would secure his children's futures. The inheritance would make him wealthy beyond anything either of us had ever imagined. But the wooden frame would sit in a drawer somewhere, forgotten, a reminder of the moment when I learned that my son's love had conditions I'd never known existed, and no amount of money could change that. The rest of the party passed in a strange blur. People who hadn't spoken to me all evening suddenly wanted to hear stories about the old farmland, about my father and grandfather, who'd worked that soil for decades before it became valuable development property. Michael's colleagues asked polite questions about farming and family history, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by the kind of interest that comes when you realize someone might be more important than you initially thought. But I felt disconnected from all of it, like I was watching everything happen to someone else. Michael tried to pull me into conversations, his arm around my shoulders, introducing me with a pride that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "This is my dad," he'd say, "the man who just changed my life." And people would smile and nod and look at me with new respect. It should have felt good. It should have been the vindication I'd never known I wanted. Instead, it felt hollow. By 9 o'clock, the party was winding down. People were making their goodbyes, thanking Sarah for a lovely evening, congratulating Michael on his good fortune. Several of them made a point of shaking my hand, telling me what a generous thing I'd done, what a lucky son Michael was to have a father like me. I smiled and nodded and said the right things, but inside I kept hearing that laugh, kept seeing the look on Michael's face when he'd held up my wooden frame. As the last guests were leaving, Michael found me in the kitchen where I was helping Sarah load the dishwasher. "Dad, can we talk? Outside?" The evening air was cool, and we sat on his back deck looking out at a yard that was perfectly landscaped and lit with expensive fixtures, nothing like the scraggly grass and hand-me-down lawn furniture we'd had when he was growing up. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I'd been waiting for this conversation, dreading it and needing it at the same time. Son, you don't owe me anything. You just inherited more money than most people see in a lifetime. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it." He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. The frame, the way I reacted. That was wrong. Wrong, such a simple word for something that had cut so deep. "I was embarrassed," he continued. "All these people from work, and you show up with something homemade, and I thought it made us both look bad. Made us look bad. Like my love was something shameful. Like the hours I'd spent creating something with my hands were an embarrassment he had to manage. I know you worked hard on it," he said. "I know it meant something, and I threw that back in your face in front of everyone." I wanted to tell him it was okay. That's what fathers do, isn't it? We forgive, we make excuses, we smooth over the hurts and pretend they don't matter because maintaining the relationship is more important than protecting our own hearts. But I couldn't make the words come. "Do you remember the birdhouse?" I asked instead. Michael looked confused by the change of subject. "The birdhouse? You were 8. We built it together in the garage, painted it blue because your mother loved blue. You were so proud of it. Couldn't wait to show her. Couldn't wait to hang it up and see if any birds would actually move in." Recognition dawned slowly on his face. "I remember. You didn't care that it wasn't fancy. You didn't care that we'd made it ourselves instead of buying something from a store. You were proud because we'd made it together, because it was ours." The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant hum of traffic on the highway that was about to make him rich. "I'm not that kid anymore, Dad." "No," I agreed. "You were not." But I had been hoping that somewhere inside this successful, sophisticated man, that little boy still existed. The one who valued things made with love over things bought with money. The one who was proud to show off something his father had created. "I can try to be better," Michael said. "About things like this. About remembering what's important." He meant it. I could tell. The guilt in his voice was genuine, and part of me wanted to accept his apology and move on. Part of me wanted to pretend that tonight hadn't revealed something fundamental about who we'd become to each other. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 days lovingly crafting a gift only to have it mocked, wasn't ready to let it go. "Your mother used to say that money doesn't change people," I said. It just reveals who they really are. Michael flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tonight, when you thought I was just your poor old dad with a homemade gift, you were embarrassed. But when you found out that poor old dad had just made you a millionaire, suddenly I was worth paying attention to. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the whole evening. I need to go home, son. Thank you for including me tonight. Dad, wait. He stood too, panic creeping into his voice. Don't leave like this. We need to talk about the land, about what happens next, about... What happens next is up to you, I said. It's your land now, your decision. I started walking toward the gate that led to the front of the house, and Michael followed me. Are you angry about the money? Do you regret giving it to me? I stopped and turned to look at him. In the porch light, he looked younger somehow, uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. I'm not angry about the money, Michael. I'm heartbroken about everything else. I left him standing there in his expensive driveway, next to his expensive car, in front of his expensive house, holding documents that made him exponentially wealthier than he'd been when the evening started. But as I drove home in my old pickup truck, past the farmland that was now his, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd both lost something tonight that was worth more than $2.3 million. And I wasn't sure either of us knew how to get it back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening over and over. The laugh, the way Michael had held up my gift like it was something to be ashamed of, the sudden transformation when he realized what the envelope contained. By 3 a.m, I was back in my workshop, not to build anything, just to sit among the tools that had given me so much purpose over the years. The smell of sawdust and wood stain, the familiar weight of a hammer in my hands, the satisfaction of creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials. This was where Michael and I had been closest, not in some expensive restaurant or fancy vacation destination, but in this cluttered garage where we'd worked side by side on weekend projects, where I'd taught him that the value of something isn't measured by what you pay for it, but by the care and thought that goes into making it. Or so I'd thought. As the sun came up, I found myself thinking about Martha, my wife, Michael's mother. What would she have said about last night? How would she have handled the situation? Martha had always been better at reading people than I was. She would have seen the changes in Michael long before I did. She would have recognized the warning signs that success was pulling him away from the values we'd tried to instill in him. But she also would have been heartbroken by what happened last night. Martha had believed in the power of handmade gifts, of time spent creating something with love rather than just buying something expensive. Some of my happiest memories of her involved watching her face light up when Michael would present her with a drawing he'd made at school or a card he'd crafted for Mother's Day. It's not about what it costs, she used to tell him. It's about what it means. Somewhere along the way, that lesson had been forgotten. By 8 o'clock, I'd made a decision that surprised me. I called Jim Peterson, my lawyer, the man who'd handled the land transfer 2 years ago. Jim, it's Bob. I need to ask you about that property deed we transferred to Michael. Good morning, Bob. How did the surprise go? I bet he was thrilled. Thrilled. That wasn't quite the word I would have used. Jim, I need you to be straight with me. Is there any way to reverse that transfer? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Bob, what's going on? Did something happen? I need to know my options, legally speaking. Jim had been my lawyer for 20 years. He'd handled Martha's estate, helped me navigate the medical bills from my heart scare, drawn up my will. He knew me well enough to hear the seriousness in my voice. Well, the transfer is complete and legal. The deed is in Michael's name, but... He paused, and I could hear papers rustling. There were some conditions built into the transfer, standard family protection clauses that I always recommend. My heart began to beat faster. What kind of conditions? The transfer was contingent on maintaining family relationships and responsibilities. Its language designed to prevent situations where someone inherits property and then abandons family obligations. If those conditions aren't met, the transfer could potentially be challenged. I hadn't remembered agreeing to those clauses, but Jim was thorough in ways that often protected his clients from their own generosity. What would constitute not meeting those conditions? That would depend on the specific circumstances, Bob. I have to ask, Are you having second thoughts about giving Michael the land? Was I? 24 hours ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. Michael was my son. I loved him. I wanted him to be financially secure, to never worry about money the way we had after Martha died. But last night had shown me something I hadn't wanted to see. My son had become someone who valued money over meaning, who was embarrassed by gestures of love that didn't come with a price tag attached. I need to think about it, I told Jim. Can you send me copies of all the paperwork? I want to review exactly what we agreed to. Of course. Bob, you know I have to ask. Has Michael done something wrong? Has he threatened you or tried to take advantage in some way? No, nothing like that. Nothing that dramatic, nothing that would hold up in court. Just a laugh that revealed everything. Just the recognition that I'd raised a son who'd grown embarrassed by his father's love. Then can I offer some advice, as your lawyer and your friend? Go ahead. Don't make any major decisions while you're emotional. Whatever happened last night, whatever you're feeling right now, sit with it for a while. Talk to Michael. Give him a chance to make things right before you do something you might regret. Jim was right, of course. This was emotional. This was me reacting to being hurt in a way I'd never expected. But it was also something else. It was me finally acknowledging that loving someone unconditionally doesn't mean accepting behavior that shows they don't respect that love. After I hung up with Jim, I spent the day reading through the transfer documents he emailed me. The legal language was complex, but the intent was clear. The land transfer was designed to keep the property in family hands and to ensure that inherited wealth came with inherited responsibility. Michael had inherited the land, but had he inherited the responsibility that came with it? Did he understand that this gift represented 3 generations of family history, of sacrifice, of love passed down from father to son? Or did he just see $2.3 million that he could invest or spend or use to buy more expensive things to impress his expensive friends? My phone rang 6 times that day. Michael trying to reach me, probably wanting to discuss investment strategies or development timelines or tax implications. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk about money. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to talk about money with the son who'd laughed at something I'd made with love. But I was beginning to understand that this wasn't really about the money at all. It was about respect. It was about values. It was about what we teach people about how to treat us. And it was about the difference between loving someone and enabling them to hurt us. Martha used to say that the hardest part of being a parent wasn't learning how to love your children unconditionally. It was learning when that unconditional love was being taken for granted. As I sat in my workshop that evening, surrounded by tools that had taught my son the value of creating rather than just consuming, I began to understand what she meant. Sometimes love means giving someone everything you have, and sometimes love means showing them what they stand to lose. Michael called 17 times over the next 3 days. 17 calls that I let go to voicemail. 17 messages that started apologetic and gradually became more frustrated, more confused about why I wasn't answering. Dad, it's me. I know you're upset, and I understand why. Can we please talk? Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about Mom, about the money not changing people. You're right. I messed up. Please call me back. Dad, this is ridiculous. I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me? That last message told me everything I needed to know. Ow. In Michael's mind, an apology should be enough to erase what had happened. Say sorry, move on, pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. On Thursday evening, I was in my workshop oiling the handles of some old chisels when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Michael's BMW. Expensive, spotless, nothing like the beat-up cars we used to work on together in this same garage. I heard his footsteps on the concrete, then a knock on the workshop door. Dad, I know you're in there. We need to talk. I opened the door, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked tired. Not just tired, exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. The second thing I noticed was what he was carrying, my wooden picture frame. I brought this, he said, holding it up. I wanted you to know that I've had it on my desk at work all week. I've been looking at it every day, thinking about the hours you spent making it. I stepped aside to let him into the workshop, and he looked around like he was seeing it for the first time in years. Maybe he was. When was the last time he'd been in here? When was the last time he'd shown any interest in the place where we used to spend so much time together? I remember this, he said, running his hand along my workbench. I remember standing on that stool so I could reach the tools. You were 4 the first time I let you help me sand something, I said. A jewelry box for your mother's birthday. You were so careful, so focused, wanted to make sure every surface was perfect. Michael smiled at the memory, but it was a sad smile. I loved working in here with you. I'd forgotten how much I loved it. We stood there in the silence of my workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects and 30 years of shared memories. But it felt like we were strangers, like all those memories belonged to different people. Dad, I don't understand why you're shutting me out. I apologized. I know I hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry, but can't we move past this? Move past this, like it was a minor disagreement, a small misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with time and good intentions. Michael, sit down. He pulled up the same stool he'd used as a child, and I sat across from him on my work chair. The picture frame sat on the workbench between us, simple and honest in a way that the conversation we were about to have would need to be. Do you know why I made that frame? Because you couldn't afford to buy me something expensive? The answer came so quickly, so automatically, that I knew it was what he'd been telling himself all week. Poor old Dad, doing his best with what he had. No, son, I made it because I wanted to give you something that couldn't be bought in a store, something that took time and thought and care, something that represented the relationship we used to have. Michael frowned. What do you mean, used to have? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked how I was doing, whether I needed anything, what was going on in my life? I call. Sarah calls. Sarah invites me to dinner. Sarah asks about my health. You're busy, I understand that. But when did I become someone you only see when it's convenient? Michael's face was flushing, and I could see him getting defensive. That's not fair. I work 60 hours a week. I have a family, responsibilities. I'm not asking you to work less or love your family less. I'm asking you when I stopped being part of that family. The question hung in the air between us, and I watched my son struggle with an answer he didn't want to give. You are part of the family, Dad. Am I? Or am I the obligation that gets checked off the list? The old man who gets invited to birthday parties and thanked for his generosity and then forgotten until the next time you need something? I don't. To need anything from you? Don't you? You needed help with the down payment on this house. You needed someone to watch the kids when Sarah was in the hospital. You needed a co-signer for that business loan 3 years ago. Each example hit home, and I watched Michael realize that he'd been taking more than he'd been giving for longer than either of us had acknowledged. I always pay you back. This isn't about money, son. It's about respect. It's about treating the people who love you like they matter, even when they can't do anything for you. Michael picked up the picture frame, turning it over in his hands the way he had at the party. But this time, instead of dismissal, I saw something like understanding in his expression. I really hurt you, he said quietly. Yes. And it wasn't just about the gift, it was about everything. About how I've been treating you, about how I've let success change the way I see people. Yes. He was quiet for a long time, studying the wood grain, the careful joints, the smooth finish that had taken me days to achieve. What do you want me to do? How do I fix this? It was the right question finally. Not how do we move past this or how do we forget this happened, but how do I fix what I've broken? I don't know if you can, I said honestly. Michael, that land I gave you? It's worth more than $2 million. But in that moment when you laughed at my gift, you showed me that money is the only value you recognize anymore. That's not true. Isn't it? Would you have apologized if there hadn't been an envelope? Would we be having this conversation if I'd just given you the frame and gone home? The silence that followed was answer enough. I want to change, Michael said finally. I want to be better, the kind of son you deserve, the kind of man Mom would be proud of. Then you need to figure out what that looks like, because I can't teach you how to love over money. That's something you have to learn for yourself. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of this conversation, by the sadness of what we'd both discovered. Dad, are you going to take the land back? There it was, the question he'd been building up to, the real reason for this visit, not to repair our relationship, but to secure his inheritance. I don't know, I said. I honestly don't know. Michael left that night carrying the picture frame, and I watched him drive away in his expensive car, back to his expensive life. But for the first time since the party, I had hope that maybe, somewhere inside the successful banker, the little boy who used to be proud of his father's handmade gifts was still alive. The question was whether that little boy was strong enough to change the man. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves $2.3 million and a family drama that people can't quite figure out. By the end of the week, I was getting phone calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all of them with opinions about what I should do. My brother Tom called first. "Bobby, I heard about what happened at Michael's party. That boy needs a wake-up call." Tom had his own problems with his kids. His oldest, Danny, had borrowed money for a business venture that failed and never bothered to pay it back. His youngest, Lisa, only called when she needed something. Tom understood what it felt like to love children who'd grown up taking that love for granted. "Sometimes we love them so much we forget to teach them how to love us back," he said. "You did the right thing, giving him that land. But if he can't appreciate what he's got, maybe he doesn't deserve to keep it." My sister Linda had a different perspective. She called Sunday evening, her voice full of concern and gentle reproach. "Bobby, I know Michael hurt your feelings, but he's a good boy, and he loves you. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Maybe he was just nervous, having all those work people around. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it came out." Linda had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over arguments and found excuses for bad behavior. She meant well, but she'd never had to raise a child alone, never had to watch someone she'd sacrificed everything for treat that sacrifice like it was worthless. "What if it was one of your boys?" I asked her. "What if you'd spent days making something with your own hands, something that meant the world to you, and they laughed at it in front of their friends?" "I'd be hurt," she admitted, "but I'd forgive them. That's what families do." "There's a difference between forgiveness and enabling, Linda. Michael needs to learn that actions have consequences even when you're family, especially when you're family." The conversation that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Jim Peterson, my lawyer, called Tuesday afternoon with an update on the legal paperwork I'd requested. "Bob, I've been thinking about our conversation, about the land transfer and the conditions that were built in. And I've been doing some research into family property law, looking at similar cases. If you decide you want to challenge the transfer, we could probably make a case. But I have to ask you something first." "What's that?" "What are you hoping to accomplish? Is this about punishment, or is this about teaching your son something important?" It was a good question, one I'd been wrestling with all week. Was I acting out of hurt pride, wanting to teach Michael a lesson about respecting his father? Or was I trying to show him something more fundamental about values and character? "I think," I said slowly, "I'm trying to save my relationship with my son before it's too late." "By taking away his inheritance?" "By showing him that love and respect aren't the same thing, that he can't have one without the other." Jim was quiet for a moment. "That's either the wisest thing you've ever done, or the most foolish. I'm not sure which. Neither am I." That evening, Sarah came to see me. Not Michael. Sarah. She knocked on my front door around 7 o'clock, holding a covered dish and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I brought you some of that lasagna you like," she said. "The one with the 3 cheeses." Sarah had always been thoughtful that way, always remembered the little things that mattered to people. It was one of the reasons I'd grown to love her like a daughter, one of the reasons her husband's behavior hurt even more. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Michael used to do his homework, and she got right to the point. "He's miserable," she said. "He's been carrying that picture frame everywhere, talking about it constantly, asking me if I think he's turned into someone his mother wouldn't recognize. What do you think?" Sarah sighed. "I think success changed him. I think having money made him forget what it was like to need things, to appreciate things, but I also think he's genuinely sorry, and he's trying to figure out how to make this right." "He asked you to come here, didn't he? To put in a good word for him?" "No," she said, surprising me. "He doesn't know I'm here. I came because I need to tell you something that Michael won't tell you himself." I waited, sensing this was important. "That picture frame? The one he laughed at? He's been carrying it to work every day, setting it on his desk where everyone can see it." When people ask about it, he tells them his father made it for him, that it's the most important thing he owns. My throat tightened. Sarah. Wait, let me finish. Yesterday, one of his colleagues made a comment about it. Said something about how it looked homemade, kind of amateur. Michael told him that amateur just meant it was made with love instead of manufactured with machines. And he told the guy that anyone could buy an expensive gift, but only someone who really cared would spend days creating something with their own hands. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. He's learning, Dad. Slowly, maybe, but he's learning. The question is whether you're going to give him the chance to show you what he's learned. After Sarah left, I sat in my workshop until late, thinking about second chances and tough love and the difference between enabling someone and believing in their capacity to change. Michael had been raised with good values. Somewhere under the expensive suits and sophisticated lifestyle, those values were still there. The question was whether losing his inheritance would teach him to value what really mattered, or whether it would just make him bitter and resentful. I thought about Martha, about what she would want me to do. She'd always believed in the power of redemption, in the possibility that people could learn from their mistakes and become better versions of themselves. But she'd also been fierce about protecting the people she loved from being taken advantage of. Love them enough to let them face consequences, she used to say when Michael was a teenager testing boundaries. That's how they learn. Maybe the biggest gift I could give my son wasn't $2.3 million worth of land. Maybe it was the chance to discover who he really was when everything was on the line. 3 months. That's how long I waited before making my final decision about the land. 3 months of sleepless nights, of conversations with lawyers and family members and my own conscience. 3 months of watching Michael try to prove that he'd learned something from the worst moment of our relationship. He called every week, not to ask about the land, but to check on me. How was my health? Did I need help with anything around the house? Had I seen the article in the local paper about the new highway project? He started showing up on Saturdays, not announced, just appearing in my driveway with coffee and donuts, asking if I had any projects he could help with. We rebuilt my back deck together, and I watched him work with his hands the way he used to as a child, careful, focused, taking pride in doing something well. But I also watched him check his phone constantly, saw him struggle with the physical work that used to come naturally to him, noticed how he talked about his job like it was something that happened to him rather than something he chose. The picture frame never left his desk at work. Sarah told me this, but I saw it for myself when I went to his office one afternoon to sign some unrelated paperwork. There it sat, simple and handmade, surrounded by expensive electronics and framed photographs of client appreciation events. "It looks good there," I told him. "It reminds me of something important," he said, "every day." But the real test came on a Tuesday in November, when the local newspaper ran a story that changed everything. Local man donates $2.3 million to scholarship fund. I hadn't told anyone about my decision, not Jim Peterson, not my brother Tom, not Sarah. I'd simply called the editor of the paper and asked him to run the announcement. The Harold and Martha Thompson Memorial Scholarship Fund, designed to help children who'd lost parents pay for college educations. Named after my father and my wife. Funded by the land that was supposed to be Michael's inheritance. I was sitting in my kitchen reading the article for the 3rd time when my phone rang. "Dad?" Michael's voice was quiet, confused, hurt in a way I'd never heard before. "I saw the paper. I figured you would. You donated the land. All of it. The whole $2.3 million. Yes." Silence stretched between us, and I could hear him breathing, could picture him sitting in his office staring at that wooden picture frame while he processed what I'd done. To help kids who lost their parents. Lee. I did, like you did when Mom died. Yes. "Dad, I don't understand. That was my inheritance. You gave it to me. And then I took it back. Because inheritance isn't just about money, Michael. It's about values. It's about understanding what really matters. It's about treating the people who love you with respect and gratitude." I could hear him crying now, quiet sobs that took me back to when he was 16, and we'd gotten the news about his mother's cancer diagnosis. "I failed the test, didn't I?" "This wasn't a test, son. It was a lesson. about what happens when we take love for granted, when we forget where we came from, when we start measuring worth by price tags instead of by what's in someone's heart. But the money, Dad, that could have set up Emma and Jake for life. Their college funds, their futures. Their futures will be just fine. You're successful, you work hard, you'll provide for them. But more importantly, maybe now they'll learn that the most valuable gifts can't be bought in stores. Michael was quiet for a long time, and I could hear traffic in the background, could picture him sitting in his expensive car in some parking lot, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Are you punishing me? No, son. I'm loving you. Sometimes love means giving someone everything you have, and sometimes love means showing them what they stand to lose when they forget how to appreciate what they've been given. I've been carrying that frame everywhere, he said, every day, trying to remember the man who made it, trying to become the kind of son who deserves a father like that. I know, Sarah told me. Then why? If you know I've been trying to change, if you know I understand what I did wrong, why take it all away? It was the hardest question he could have asked, and the one I'd been dreading most. Because real change doesn't happen when the stakes are low, Michael. It happens when everything is on the line, when you have to choose between who you were and who you want to become. And you think I'll choose wrong? I think you'll choose what matters most to you, and I hope that when you make that choice, it won't be about money. We talked for another hour, sitting there, connected by phone lines and 35 years of history, father and son trying to find their way back to each other across a gap that had grown wider than either of us had realized. When we finally hung up, I felt empty and hopeful at the same time. Empty because I'd just given away the largest gift I'd ever been able to offer my son. Hopeful because maybe, for the first time in years, we could build a relationship based on something more solid than financial obligation. A week later, Michael showed up at my workshop carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of lumber. I want to build something, he said. With you, something that doesn't cost much but means everything. We spent that Saturday building a bookshelf for Emma's room. Nothing fancy, just pine boards and wood glue, and the kind of careful attention that turns raw materials into something useful and beautiful. Michael worked slowly, thoughtfully, asking questions about grain direction and joint strength just like he used to when he was 8 years old. His hands had grown soft from years of office work, but they remembered how to hold tools, how to measure twice and cut once. I called the newspaper, he said while we were sanding, about the scholarship fund. Oh? I want to help, not with money, I know that's not the point, but with time, with volunteer work. Maybe I can help interview applicants or mentor some of the recipients. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years, the boy who used to be proud to introduce me to his friends, the young man who understood that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can buy. I'd like that, I said. Dad? Yeah? I'm sorry. For all of it. For forgetting what you taught me, for taking your love for granted, for becoming someone Mom wouldn't recognize. You're not that person anymore, son. How do you know? I gestured at the bookshelf we were building together, at his hands working carefully with wood and tools, at the concentration on his face as he tried to make something perfect for his daughter. Because you're here. Because you chose to spend your Saturday in a dusty workshop instead of on a golf course. Because you understand that the best gifts are the ones we make with our own hands. We finished the bookshelf as the sun was setting, and Michael loaded it carefully into his car to take home to Emma. As he was getting ready to leave, he handed me something, the wooden picture frame, but now it held a photograph. A picture of the 2 of us from that afternoon, covered in sawdust, grinning at the camera that Sarah had used to capture the moment. I thought you might want this back, he said, with something in it that shows what it really means. I took the frame, looked at the photo of father and son working together, and felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with money or inheritance or any of the complications that had nearly cost us each other. Keep it, I said, handing it back to him. You'll need it to remember this day when things get complicated again. And they will get complicated, Michael. Success has a way of making us forget what really matters. Then I'll keep this to remind me. He hugged me goodbye, and as I watched him drive away, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't sad about the $2.3 million. I wasn't second-guessing my decision to donate the land to help other families, because what I'd gotten in return was worth so much more. I'd gotten my son back. The Harold and Martha Thompson Memorial Scholarship Fund now helps dozens of kids every year pay for college educations. Kids who've lost parents, who understand what it means to struggle, who might grow up to be the key. And of adults who value love over money and remember where they came from. And every Saturday, weather permitting, Michael comes over to work on projects in my garage. We're building a treehouse for Emma and Jake, using the same kind of simple tools and careful attention that once built a blue birdhouse for a woman who loved to watch for robins outside her kitchen window. Sometimes the most expensive gift you can give someone is the chance to discover who they really are. Sometimes love means taking everything away so they can learn what truly matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they choose love over money. They choose to come home,